Chapter 24 of Rest, Part 1.
Welcome to the Crystal Empire, Twilight Sparkle,
the old unicorn stallion said. His coat was a dusky gray, disappearing so smoothly into the shadows of his thick hides that his body appeared almost made of glittering smoke.
I am Smoke Quartz, 12th Regent of the West Face.
And I am Arctic Rose, 10th Regent of the East Face.
The unicorn mare bowed where she sat opposite him. The colorful crystals woven into her graying pink mane chimed softly as she moved.
I welcome you to the Crystal Empire, Twilight Sparkle.
Last to speak was the Pegasus mare sitting between them, the youngest of the three, though still venerable in her own right. She wore less clothing, and her body was so translucent in the firelight that for a moment, Twilight imagined she was looking at a ghost.
My name is Amatrine. As the 12th Regent of the South Face, I welcome you to the Crystal Empire.
She smiled as she bowed, her long mane tickling the floor between her hooves.
You honor me greatly with your arrival, Twilight Sparkle. So polite,
Midnight mused.
It is good of them to know their place. What are you doing?
Twilight was already bowing back, a wide smile on her face.
These ponies don't see us as monsters, Midnight. We should show them the same respect they show us. They may not think us a monster, but they think us something. Something greater. You lower us to their level. I'm not looking for servants.
Twilight lifted her head, and the three regents followed suit. To her surprise, the ponies watching from the edges of the room had bowed as well.
The pleasure is mine, really. I've come a long way with many questions, and you have no idea how relieved I am to be able to speak to you like this.
She paused to take a breath before her excitement got the better of her.
I'm not interrupting anything, am I?
Amatrine shook her head softly.
We've been waiting for you since marking your ship, just before the storm, though we were not expecting a chosen. Not expecting it, but it aligns with the snow.
Arctic Rose added.
A strong fall from the east. The flurry favors your visit.
Smoke Quartz nodded.
It's been centuries since equestrian eyes shone upon the Empire. Have you brought the stock we agreed upon? We can have food brought if you'd like to discuss trade.
Twilight's brow furrowed.
I'm sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding. We didn't know you were here until we saw you, and we didn't bring anything to trade. We're explorers.
It was the easiest way to explain it.
To my knowledge, nobody in Equestria knows you're here.
The regents frowned, looking among themselves. Smoke spoke first, eyeing her with a new curiosity.
You do not know Count Deep Diver?
Twilight cocked her head, thinking it over. She wasn't the first equestrian to discover this settlement? It did make sense. The evidence suggested that the city had been here at least before the floods, which gave at least half a millennia for explorers venturing north to find it. The way the regent spoke gave her the impression that some kind of regular trade deal had been struck. But then why did nobody in Equestria seem to know about the city now? Perhaps the ponies on the equestrian side had kept it as a trade secret and it had died along with them? How had this city maintained such secrecy despite being so developed? With a sigh, she shook her head.
I'm sorry, but I don't. Whatever trade deal you made, I'm afraid it's been forgotten. Please, do you have time to answer some questions? Or maybe schedule an appointment otherwise?
Smoke Quartz arched a brow, but Arctic Rose answered her with a slow nod.
Trade or not, you are our guest and chosen. We are honored to assist.
Twilight grinned.
Finally! Answers!
She was just opening her saddlebags and reaching for Shining Armor's journal when Smoke stomped a hoof, the sharp crack of the impact drawing her attention. He was watching her with narrowed eyes. Had she done something wrong?
I will ask my question first, one which I think sits in all minds assembled here today.
He glanced towards the other two regents, waiting to see if they would interrupt him.
Do you know the Shaper, Twilight Sparkle?
Twilight blinked. Was he suspicious of her?
I don't know. I've never heard the name until today, but perhaps you could explain who they are?
She slowly pulled Shining's journal out and began to levitate it before her, watching for any negative reaction to her magic. But she saw only curiosity, wonder, and confusion around her.
I might know them by another name.
Ametrine answered with a warm smile, far more inviting than Smoke's piercing stare.
The Shaper saved us, raising us up above the ice during the flood that formed the world. They taught us to carve crystal into our homes, to hunt the beasts that travel in the frost, and to control the darkness that lives in our hearts.
She looked up to the circle of strange black crystal that sat between her and the other two regents. Following her gaze, Twilight noticed a shimmering crystal statue raised in the center of the circle, tall enough to be seen from all around the room. Two maneless heads shared a single body, each facing an opposite direction and looking resolutely forward with smooth, blank eyes. One head was slender and elegant, appearing strangely familiar to Twilight, while the other projected masculine authority. The first head had a long, slender horn that reminded Twilight of Princess Celestia, a stark contrast to the short, sharp-edged horn that carved out of the crown of the other. They both shared a single neck that swelled into an oversized, angular heart shape. A single wing flared out opposite the heart, like it was growing from the middle of the two-headed pony's back. Twilight blinked, her eyes sliding off the black crystals that hemmed in the statue like a glittering palisade. After a brief pause, Ametrine continued.
They make their home deep in the spire where they protect us still, warding off the creatures of darkness that attempt to rise from beneath the ice. And we live our lives by the code they established long ago.
Arctic Rose nodded.
You express the signs of the Shaper's blessing, Twilight Sparkle, and they're stronger than I have ever seen. I cannot recall any stories of the Shaper ever choosing an equestrian to aid in the battle. But it is clear you have been chosen, and you've been brought here from very far away.
Twilight's brow furrowed as she took it all in. It was clear to her by now that the Shaper was more of a religious symbol than an actual pony, but there was still much she could learn from the legend. The rest of Equestria had developed new religions around the princesses after all, so perhaps this Shaper was based on a real pony as well. Or more likely, two ponies. Could one of them be Cadence? She bit her lip as she glanced back to the long horn of the more feminine figure. It was a long shot to identify the bust as anyone with the near total lack of identifying features. But it was clearly an alicorn's horn. And besides that, who could have inspired the masculine image? Twilight jotted down a few notes for later.
How come I haven't seen any other chosen ponies?
She asked. The regent spoke like it was a relatively common occurrence.
Do they live separate from the others?
The chosen do not live among us,
Smoke said, eyeing her intently.
They descend into the spire to fight as guardians against the darkness. It is the Shaper's will.
Twilight stiffened, glancing to where Midnight watched in thoughtful silence. She parted her lips in a bloody smile.
That sounded almost like an order. Or a threat.
Ematrina smiled, nodding encouragingly.
That is why you came here, yes? To be chosen from so far and travel all this way. You must be a very special pony.
Twilight licked her lips, ignoring Midnight's conjured mental images of the entire room bathed in blood.
What does it mean to descend into the spire, exactly? It is the greatest honor any pony can have,
Ematrine said, waving a wing to the black crystals in the center of the room.
The door opens only for the chosen. They traverse the winding stairs down beneath the ice and will fight at the Shaper's side until the world thaws. If they attempt to force us, I will kill them. Yes, you've made that very clear, thank you. Would you please keep your daydreams to yourself, at least while I'm talking to them? I don't complain when you dream of coconuts and conga lines.
Twilight answered with a mental roll of her eyes as she stood, approaching the black crystal. Disturbing as it was when she had first entered the room, it was forthright menacing from up close, towering 4 times her height. Even though it was impossible to see any edges with the way it absorbed the light, she was certain that she could cut herself if she touched it in the wrong place. Midnight stepped up to her side as she examined it, her eyes focused intently on the surface. Slowly, she reached out a cracked hoof. The tower shivered under Twilight's hooves, and she took a step back, ears flattening in alarm. With the sound of grinding stone, the sections of crystal in front of her slid down into the floor, leaving a gap wide enough to step through.
What did you do? What? You're the one that touched it!
Midnight scoffed.
Fool! Our hooves remain firmly beneath us. We both know I didn't move them.
Twilight jumped as a hoof wrapped around her shoulder, pulling her away from the gap, and she turned to see Smoke Quartz had left his seat.
You may descend soon, but not yet, he said firmly. First, we must hunt, and then a feast in your honor. Every pony in the Empire will want to attend your ceremony.
Oh.
Twilight glanced back to the gap. She just caught sight of the lip of a stairwell carved into the floor, and then with a shuddering screech, the black crystal that had sunk out of sight shot back into place, blocking her sight.
I need to talk to my friends.
Rainbow had never been the best at judging the passage of time, but she was sure that Twilight had been gone for too long. Had it been 5 minutes? 30? It felt like hours to her. She could tell exactly how long an exercise lasted from the burn in her muscles, or how long it took her to fly from Cloudsdale to Kennerlot, but when stuck in a room and told to sit still, time lost all meaning. She stood stiffly a short distance from the big crystal doors that led back outside, stealing quick glances to her left every few seconds to make sure Applejack was still there. Sea Saber and Star Trails waited right next to the door, the former scanning the chamber with slow sweeps of her head, while the latter's attention darted from point to point with something between nerves and interest. And then there were all the other eyes in the room. Shimmering, curious eyes perched above mouths lined with teeth ground down into fine points. Most of the adults had gotten over their staring by now, turning back to focus on their grisly tasks. The foals, meanwhile, wouldn't look away. They huddled together in small groups of 3 and 4, watching the armored ponies with wide eyes and whispering among themselves. Where was Twilight? What were these weird predator ponies doing with her? Rainbow thought back to Daring Do and the Curse of the Jungle Queen, where Daring Do had met a lost tribe of cannibals very similar to this. They had been peaceful at first, and then they got hungry. One of the foals, a little yellow filly with a bobbed red mane, stepped out from her group of friends. Rainbow stiffened as the filly approached, all big eyes and sharp teeth, and came to a stop a few steps away from her and Applejack. The filly paused, glancing back to her friends, watching from behind a rack of a tanning hide, and then mustered her courage. She looked to Rainbow first, then Applejack, asking in a quiet, hopeful voice,
Did you bring us apples?
Rainbow blinked. Sea Saber's voice clicked into her ear.
Ignore her.
But Applejack was already moving. Even past the stern facade of her helmet, Rainbow could see the cow pony giving in. She reached back to the bulky saddlebag built onto her side, a small jet of steam venting from the watertight seal as it opened, and extracted a single, hoof-sized apple. For a moment, Rainbow considered asking why Applejack had brought an apple to explore a mysterious, frozen city that more than likely was filled to the brim with snarling monsters. But then she realized, of course she had an apple on her. It would be like asking why Pinky carried cupcakes.
Applejack,
Saber cautioned.
we can't trust these ponies. Y'all can hush, Saber.
Applejack said calmly.
No disrespect to y'all, but it just ain't in my blood to turn down a cute little filly asking for an apple.
She crouched down to the filly's level, the smile in her voice clear past the tinny echo of her helmet.
Here you go, Sugar Cube.
The filly's eyes lit up with joy as she jumped forwards, grabbing the apple in her little sharp teeth. She reared up to give Applejack an enthusiastic hug, shouting muffled thanks through the package in her mouth, and then turned and darted back to her gaping friends, each of which rushed out from behind the tanning rack to meet her halfway.
You shouldn't have done that,
Saber said.
Now they'll all want one.
Wait, are we just gonna brush over the fact that she actually was carrying an apple on her?
Trails asked.
Or that the filly knew to ask for one? Am I the only one weirded out by this?
I'll have you know, an apple is a healthy, filling, and delicious snack no matter where you might be.
Applejack shot back. She sighed over the radio.
And I reckon wherever you find ponies, someone will be aching for one.
Rainbow frowned, seeing the way Applejack watched after the little filly and her friends. A soft gasp escaped her as she realized. Yellow coat, red mane.
The filly reminds her of Apple Bloom.
Instead of the swarm of demanding foals that Saber had predicted, the little crystal ponies all gathered into a circle, passing the apple between themselves. One by one, they took turns, snipping little bites off the fruit, laughing and grinning at the juice dripping down their lips. Soon other foals were running up to join, and they were welcomed graciously into the circle, where they patiently waited their turn. By the end, there were over a dozen foals passing the apple amongst themselves, chattering eagerly and shooting curious, nervous glances towards Applejack, who would lift a hoof to wave every time. An adult came over to inspect the commotion, and Rainbow tensed as she anticipated some kind of negative reaction. But instead, the mare smiled and laughed along with the foals, before looking at Applejack with a dip of her head and moving on. The apple survived 3 rounds of the circle before being chewed down to its core, and a colt let out an exclamation of surprise as he spit the seeds out into his hoof. He grinned, showing it to the others, and an instant later ran off to speak to an elder mare watching from inside her tent, who accepted the seeds with a soft smile.
I'm gonna talk to them.
Applejack stood up, already reaching for her helmet.
Applejack, we need to stay together.
Saber hissed.
The thinner our formation, the easier it'll be for them to catch us off guard. Look, Saber, I don't know what y'all have been through. And I know you got only the best of intentions here. But I ain't felt this right since... well, not since I baked them apple fritters for the wedding with Cousin Apple Fritter.
Her helmet popped off with a hiss of steam, and she clipped it onto her side before glancing back with watery eyes.
And them foals look like they might need someone to show them what to do with apple seeds.
She walked off without waiting for a response, smiling down at the foals as they gathered around her and settled down to speak at their level. Rainbow cringed, bracing herself for Saber's reaction to being brushed off so roughly, but it was Trails' voice that cracked into her ear.
She has a cousin named Apple Fritter that bakes apple fritters.
Yeah,
Rainbow said quietly, still expecting to be interrupted by Saber at any moment.
Her family tree reads like a dessert menu. And it's all apples.
Rainbow sighed.
Yep. All apples.
Rainbow Dash.
Saber's voice was terse.
I'm bringing the Argo back in. You have 5 minutes to get yourself an Applejack aboard, or I'll leave you both.
Rainbow pursed her lips.
Yes, ma'am.
She reached up, releasing the locks on her helmet with a hoof, sliding it off, and transferring it to one of her wings. Tossing her mussed mane side to side, she took a breath, nose twitching at the strange taste that hung in the air. One glance back confirmed that Saber and Trails had already stepped back outside, leaving her and Applejack alone amidst the tribe of potentially dangerous meat-eaters. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even offended. If there was one thing that she respected about Sea Saber, it was that the mare always had her priorities straight. And after the mess Rainbow had brought on her, she doubted she would ever be counted as one of her crew again. Rainbow pushed those thoughts aside as she approached Applejack and the ring of foals, putting on a stiff smile when they rushed around her, lips flapping like a school of adorable, clumsy piranhas.
Miss Applejack, who's this? Do you have another apple? Or maybe a strawberry? What happened to your eye? Your mane is so pretty.
Rainbow did her best to keep the smile from twisting into a grimace.
Hey kids, sorry, but AJ and I have really gotta get going. Aww, already?
A sky blue filly with stubby little wings pouted up at her, glancing back to Applejack.
But you just got here. Don't you want to stay to watch your chosen friend ascend?
Rainbow blinked. She let out a nervous laugh as she pushed through the foals and wrapped a wing around Applejack's side, hissing quietly past her smile.
AJ, Saber's leaving.
That's fine by me,
Applejack said. She had donned her hat sometime while Rainbow wasn't looking, begging the question of where she'd stashed it until then.
These kids ain't done me no harm, and we still got time while we're waiting for Twi. Did you know they used to have an apple tree in this place?
She shook her head with a bemused smile.
Hey, if I know how they ever got an apple to take seed this far north, but little Sodalite there says her great aunt got a bite from its last fruiting.
And now I get one too!
A unicorn filly with swirly blue mane pranced in place, grinning ear to ear.
I can't wait to tell her!
Rainbow's smile was already cracking.
AJ, look, I know how you feel about apples, but we really shouldn't be stranding ourselves here. Twi can always teleport back onto the ship whenever she wants, but
nothing.
Applejack turned away sharply.
Twilight'll be expecting us here when she gets back. You can go on if you want. I won't blame you. But by Celestia, I'm not gonna leave that filly turning circles wondering why we ain't around when she shows up.
Rainbow's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth to spew out some rebuttal, but nothing came. No matter how she looked at it, Applejack was right. And there was a part of Rainbow already hitting herself for not realizing it on her own. Even if it meant allowing themselves to be left behind in the middle of an unknown village, inhabited by potentially dangerous cannibals, even if Saber got fed up at dealing with them and decided to fly back south and gamble Princess Luna's life for those of her crew, there really wasn't any other choice. That was just the kind of thing the elements of harmony did for each other.
You're right.
She sighed, plopping down and leaning against Applejack's right side.
I'm sorry.
Don't sweat it, Sugar Cube.
Applejack leaned down to nuzzle Rainbow's cheek.
Now, why don't you tell these fools all about y'all's sonic rainboom, huh? Colorful as this place might be, I'd wager they ain't never seen anything like it.
Rainbow frowned, casting her eye around the ring of foals and watching their ears perk up as they picked up on a potentially interesting story. One of them stepped forwards, wings spread.
What's a sonic rainboom? Is it like snow?
Rainbow snorted.
Nah, it's not quite like snow, kid.
With another sigh, she straightened up, treating the assembled foals to a cocky grin as she slid into her bragging voice.
But I can tell you what it is like. And who knows, maybe I'll even have a chance to show you one.
Lips pouted in concentration, Rarity put the finishing touches on her signature and leaned back to review her words. Despite the various upsets, she had tried to keep a regular habit of exchanging letters with her friends elsewhere in Equestria. She'd send them off to Highton to be forwarded to wherever they might be, and as long as she kept Mr. Rich's staff up to date on her travel plans, they would ensure that any responses got back to her in kind. Of course, the schedule had been somewhat disrupted when an entire island had dropped out from under her hooves, and the mail had slowed significantly during the siege, but with the excess of peace and time aboard her current vessel, it seemed pertinent to try again. The last letter she had received from the Argo had come to her just before the siege. Rainbow and Applejack had written about finding Twilight and Canterlot, the near-fatal showdown with Spike, the fate of the elements, and Twilight's plan to travel north. She had yet to hear from them since. Rationally, she knew the silence was most likely due to a lack of stops. The Argo would have little reason to make port on its way north, and even if it did, there likely wasn't much happening aboard. Still, she couldn't help but worry. And seeing as she herself had been unable to get letters off the island during the siege of Friesland, she had every intent of sending one out the instant she set hoof on land once more. And so she had put pen to paper, describing the chaos of her time in the city. She tapped the butt of the pen against her chin. Pinky would want to add some words of her own, and Fluttershy... Rarity's brow furrowed. She still hadn't quite caught up with Fluttershy yet.
Well, I'm sure the dear would appreciate a quiet conversation over some tea.
She stood, stretching her legs and collecting her riding supplies. It was growing late, and with the sun hanging low over the horizon, it was too dark to be riding in the little cargo nook that passed for her quarters. She had taken a position on deck instead, using a saddlebag packed with fabric as a makeshift desk, set far enough back from the bow that the headwind toying with her mane wouldn't make off with her paper. The ship's envelope cast a deep shadow over the rear half of the deck, the drone of the large propellers at the rear somewhat muffled by the bulk of the hull. Though the crew numbered only about 20, it was usually easy to find one, and this time was no different. Rarity spied an Earth Stallion looking over the railing amidships, and after pausing to don her saddlebags, approached him with a polite smile.
Excuse me, have you seen my friend Fluttershy? Soft-spoken yellow Pegasus?
The stallion's ear flicked, but he kept his eyes focused on whatever he was watching below.
Heard you standing folk in the mess.
Rarity nodded.
Thank you. Ta-ta for now.
The stallion didn't respond. Curious, Rarity leaned over to see what he was so intent on, and her eyes widened as she saw a Pegasus mare dangling from a rope on the side of the hull. She had a toolbox slung around her neck and was busily digging around in a maintenance panel with her front hooves. Rarity looked back to the stallion.
What is she doing?
The stallion grunted.
Working.
But if she falls, then...
You questioning my knots?
The stallion finally looked up, fixing Rarity with a callous glare. And with a start, Rarity realized that the mare's rope was tied off to the railing beside him.
If it breaks, I'll catch her. So quit distracting me.
Of course. Apologies.
Rarity dipped her head, backing away, and tried to put the mare out of her mind. Surely she was a professional that knew what she was doing. No doubt the captain and crew took every precaution to ensure safety. It was a short walk down to the mess room, a long, somewhat cramped room filled by a single metal table. The sound of cooking and the not-so-enticing smell of boiling vegetables drifted from a doorway in one corner. Fluttershy, Brownie, and one of the ship's crew were seated at the table, in front of a mat of white cloth weighed down by various little bottles and thin liners. The crew pony, an earth mare with bags under her eyes, clenched her jaw as Fluttershy used a wingtip to dab clear goop over a wound on her leg. Next came a square of thick white cloth, which she pressed atop the treated wound with a hoof. Fluttershy nodded to herself, not looking away as she spoke.
Bandage, please.
Brownie grunted. He turned to the mat of supplies, Big Nose sniffling thoughtfully, before he selected a roll of gauze, measured at a length, and cut it free with a slice from his claws.
Thank you.
Fluttershy took the gauze in her other hoof, wrapping it around the crew pony's leg and tying it tight with her mouth.
You done?
The mare frowned down at her treated leg.
I gotta get some sleep while I can. All done.
Fluttershy smiled at her.
Just be more careful in the future, okay? Yeah. Appreciate it.
The mare slid off the bench, shooting a curious glance at Rarity as she walked past her, and out of sight. Rarity greeted Fluttershy with a smile.
You're becoming quite the accomplished healer, darling.
Fluttershy blushed, keeping her eyes on her medical supplies as she carefully began to roll the mat tight.
I'm not really. Nonsense.
Rarity sat beside her with a quiet tut.
You knew just what to do during the attack on the manor, after all. Why, if I'd had your help in the city, the good we could have done.
Fluttershy's lips stretched into a thin smile, but she said nothing. Rarity's brow furrowed. Fluttershy was always a shy filly, yes, but she was hardly adverse to conversation among her friends. Right now, it was just the two of them, and she even had Brownie nearby to give her extra confidence, so there had to be a reason for her silence. Rarity watched the way the other mare's hooves shivered as she tied off the ends of her mat, securing the supplies inside, and turned away to scratch at Brownie's chin. Something was on Fluttershy's mind, and for whatever reason she didn't want to share. Then it came to her in a flash of insight. and Rarity bit her lip as she realized her blunder. She had been so eager to compliment Fluttershy on her skills, to try and make her feel good by mentioning how she'd be so useful inside the besieged city, that she had completely forgot that Fluttershy had spent said siege inside an actual military camp, among soldiers partaking in active warfare, most likely tending to the wounded every day. It all clicked together. Her newfound confidence among strangers, the way the soldiers had treated her after the siege, how she'd avoided talking about her time in camp since they reunited. Rarity thought back to the image of Friesland airships dropping firebombs on the siege camp, and how afraid she'd been for her friend trapped beneath them. Fluttershy had seen terrible things while Rarity played diplomat in the city. As gruesome as she had thought it was tending to the victims of one bombing, Fluttershy had been forced to wade through worse, even if only by her own unending well of kindness. Every day. And she had gotten good at it. She had grown proficient in the bloody art of saving lives. Her basic veterinary knowledge honed on the groaning whetstone of ponies brought down by cannon and bayonet. No doubt she had saved dozens of lives during her stay in the siege camp, rescued more wounded than Rarity had even seen within the city. And Rarity had been so foolish as to suggest she'd have been more useful elsewhere, that she hadn't already been useful. Rarity closed her eyes and took a breath. Fluttershy had every right to be upset, to snap out at her and correct her. But, graceful angel as the other mare always was, she had kept it all inside. Rarity wouldn't press her further on the matter. Fluttershy processed her emotions quietly, and often only in the confidence of her animals. Rarity opened her eyes to see Fluttershy watching her with a quiet, somber smile. Even if they didn't talk about it, sometimes friends didn't need words. Rarity's horn glowed, and the moment passed. Both mares followed the rolled-up letter as it floated out onto the table and straightened out.
I was just writing a letter to our friends, keeping them updated, assuring them we're all well and the like. I'm sure Pinky will want to have her turn as well before we send it off, but I thought you might want to include your own thoughts first.
She smiled and tossed her mane with a playful wink.
I'm sure you know how difficult it can be to try and write on paper after she's gotten her hooves on it.
Fluttershy returned the smile, warm and genuine.
I wouldn't have it any other way. She, really knows how to put love into a letter.
She pulled the paper closer with a wingtip.
Oh, I'm sorry, do you have a pen? I most certainly do, my sweet. No trouble at all.
Rarity levitated her pen out and placed it neatly next to the paper.
Take as long as you like, and I do have spare pens.
She made to stand, but Rarity's wing flashed out to stop her.
Don't go.
She blushed as Rarity froze, waiting expectantly, and looked away.
I mean, unless you need to. I don't want you to leave us all, or, I don't really need you to stay either, but,
Fluttershy hung her head with a frustrated little groan. Brownie snuffled curiously, nosing past her mane, and she leaned into him with a huff. Rarity giggled, relaxing back onto the bench and scooting a little closer.
Do not fret, dear Fluttershy. I'd love to spend some quiet time together.
She leaned in with a playful whisper.
Now, I don't believe there's a spa anywhere aboard this vessel, but I do believe I could acquire some tea from the galley if you're interested.
Fluttershy nodded, risking a glance up past her mane.
Yes, please. Your wish is my command.
Rarity gave Fluttershy a brief nuzzle before standing.
I shall be back in mere minutes, even if all I can find for us is 2 cups of hot water.
She paused in the doorway to the galley, glancing back. Fluttershy heaved another sigh before straightening up, scratching a wing under Brownie's chin and cooing softly. With a content smile, Rarity went in search of tea.